Terran legends ended empires. The Galactic Conquered had kept peace for 12,000 years. This was not a small thing. Before the Conquered, the galaxy had burned with endless wars. Species had died by the billions. Entire star systems had been destroyed. But then the three great empires came together and said enough. The Dominion, the crystalline hegemony, and the eternal sovereignty of joined their power and created order from chaos. For 12,000 years, no one challenged them. No one dared. Archon stood in the great library of the Dominion, his four eyes scanning ancient texts that few living beings had ever seen. He was old, even by standards, and he had spent his long life studying the past. Most of his people cared only about the future. They built ships and weapons and conquered new worlds, but believed that the past held secrets worth knowing. Today, he had found something that troubled him deeply. The text before him was written in a language that had been dead for 3 million years. It came from a species called the, who had once ruled a small empire in what was now empty space. They had vanished completely, leaving behind only ruins and these few surviving records. The words on the screen made no sense to him at first. They spoke of a great enemy, a species that had come from nowhere and destroyed everything they had built. But it was not the destruction that caught his attention. It was the name. Terrans had never heard this word before. He searched the Dominion's vast databases and found nothing. He reached out to scholars in the hegemony and the sovereignty, and they too knew nothing of any species by that name. But when he dug deeper into the oldest archives, he began to find more references. Always the same name, always the same warning. Beware the Terrans. The warnings appeared in the ruins of civilizations that had died millions of years apart. They were written in languages that had never had contact with each other. They described a species that looked weak and fragile, with soft skin and short lives. A species that should have been easy to conquer. But every civilization that had tried to conquer them had fallen. Brought his findings to the High Council of the Dominion. The council chamber was vast, its walls lined with the trophies of 1,000 conquered worlds. The 7 members of the council sat on floating thrones, looking down at him with expressions of bored superiority. "You waste our time with ghost stories," said Supreme Commander L, the most powerful military mind in the Dominion. "These Terrans, if they ever existed, are clearly long dead. No species could survive for millions of years without being detected." "With respect, Commander," said, "the warnings suggest otherwise. They speak of a species that appears and disappears, that rises and falls and rises again. One text from the Confederation, dated 4 million years ago, says this. They chose to forget. They buried their ships and their weapons and became primitive again, but they will remember. They always remember." The council members exchanged glances. Some looked amused, others looked annoyed, none looked worried. "Even if such a species existed," said, "what does it matter to us? The Conquered controls 10,000 star systems. We have weapons that can crack planets like eggs. No primitive species could threaten us." Wanted to argue, but he knew it was pointless. They had not become the dominant power in the galaxy by being afraid. They had become dominant by crushing anything that stood in their way. 3 days later, a survey vessel called the Bright Horizon made a routine scan of a small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The star had 8 planets, none of which seemed particularly interesting. But on the 3rd planet, the ship's sensors detected something unexpected. Life, intelligent life. A civilization that had discovered basic space travel but had not yet left its own star system. The captain of the Bright Horizon, a young officer named Axe, followed standard protocol. He reported the discovery to Dominion Command and requested instructions. The response came quickly. "Observe and document, but do not make contact." A proper diplomatic delegation would be sent. Axe did as he was told. He moved his ship closer to the planet and began scanning. What he saw confused him. The species that lived on this world called themselves humans. They were soft and fragile, just as the old warnings had described. They had short lives and weak bodies. Their technology was primitive compared to even the least advanced members of the Conquered. But there was something strange about them. Their world showed signs of ancient conflict, old radiation signatures, buried ruins that did not match their current civilization, and deep beneath their oceans and mountains, Axe detected energy readings that made no sense. Energy readings that suggested technology far more advanced than anything the humans currently possessed. He reported this to command. They told him to keep watching. 2 weeks later, the diplomatic delegation arrived. It consisted of 3 ships, each carrying representatives from all 3 founding empires of the Conquered. This was standard procedure for first contact with a new species. The Conquered liked to present a united front. Ambassador of the Dominion led the delegation. He was a skilled diplomat who had brought dozens of species into the Conquered, always on terms favorable to the founding empires. He expected this contact to be no different. The delegation landed on the humans' largest continent, in a city called Geneva. Thousands of humans gathered to watch as the ships descended from the sky, studied them through his ship's sensors, and felt a mix of amusement and contempt. They looked so small and weak, so easy to control. The delegation emerged from their ships and walked toward a group of humans who waited at the edge of the landing zone. One human, a female with gray hair and calm eyes, stepped forward to greet them. "Welcome to Earth," she said. "I am Ambassador. We have been expecting you." Was surprised. The humans should not have known the delegation was coming. They did not have the technology to detect ships in faster-than-light travel. But his surprise turned to shock when the human spoke again, this time imperfect. Not the trade language that most species used, but the high formal tongue that only the most educated could speak. "We wondered when you would finally find your way back to us," Ambassador said. She smiled, and there was something in her eyes that made feel suddenly cold. "It has been a very long time." Struggled to maintain his composure. "You speak our language. How is this possible? Our records show no previous contact between our peoples." "Your records are incomplete," said. "But that is not your fault. We made sure they would be." The other members of the delegation shifted nervously. The hegemony representative, a crystalline being named Prism of Truth, spoke through their translation device. "Explain your meaning, human. What do you mean you made sure?" Smile did not waver. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable. We have much to discuss, and some of it may be difficult to hear." She led them into a building that looked ordinary from the outside. But inside, the walls were lined with displays that showed star maps far more detailed than anything the Conquered possessed. Images of ships that had never appeared in any database. Texts in languages that had been dead for millions of years. Recognized some of those texts. They were the same ones had shown to the High Council. "We know why you are here," said. "You found the warnings we left behind, the warnings about the Terrans." She paused. "We are the Terrans, though we prefer to call ourselves human now." "That is impossible," said Lord Al of the Eternal Sovereignty, his voice sharp with disbelief. "The warnings span millions of years. No species could survive that long." "Survival is not the hard part," said. "The hard part is choosing to forget, choosing to start over, choosing to be something different than what you were." She touched a panel on the wall and the displays changed. Now they showed images of ancient battles, ships larger than moons, weapons that tore holes in the fabric of space, and everywhere in every battle the same symbol, a simple blue circle on a white background. "We were old when the first members of the Conquered were still learning to make fire," said. "We spread across this galaxy and found only war, species that could not tolerate others, empires that saw difference as threat, so we fought, and we won, every single time." She turned to face the delegation, and her calm expression became something harder. But victory has a cost. We became the thing we hated. We became conquerors, destroyers, monsters. So we made a choice. We came back to Earth, buried our technology, and made ourselves forget. We edited our own genes to become mortal again. We started over from nothing, hoping we could learn to be better. Found his voice. Why are you telling us this? His eyes met his. Because you have a choice to make. You can accept what I have told you and work with us to build something better than the old empires, or you can react with fear and try to destroy us. She paused. I should warn you, others have made the second choice. It never ends well for them. Looked at the ancient star maps, at the images of battles fought before his species existed, at the calm face of this human who spoke of millions of years as if they were nothing. For the first time in his long career, he did not know what to say. The delegation returned to the conquered with Ambassador's message. For 3 days, the high councils of all 3 empires debated what to do. Some argued for caution. Some argued for negotiation. But the loudest voices belonged to those who saw only one option. Supreme Commander L stood before the combined councils and spoke with absolute certainty. These humans are a threat. They admit they have destroyed civilizations before. They admit they have weapons we cannot match. If we wait, they will grow stronger. If we wait, they will destroy us as they destroyed the others. He slammed his fist on the podium. We must strike first. We must strike now. We must wipe them out before they can remember how to fight. The vote was close, but L won. The fleet, the most powerful military force in the galaxy, began preparing for war. On Earth, Ambassador watched the fleet assembling through sensors that the conquered did not know existed. She sighed and closed her eyes. I had hoped they would choose differently, she said to the empty room. Then she opened her eyes and began the process of waking up systems that had slept for a very long time. The fleet arrived in Earth's star system with overwhelming force. 300 warships, each one capable of destroying a planet. They had come prepared for resistance. They had come prepared for war. They were not prepared for what happened next. As the fleet approached Earth, space itself seemed to twist. Ships that had been cloaked for millions of years appeared out of nowhere. Orbital platforms that looked like moons activated weapons that bent light and gravity. In the span of 3 seconds, the entire fleet simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, erased. The conquered sensors registered the fleet as never having been there at all. 300 ships and their crews, gone as if they had never existed. A single message was broadcast to every receiver in the conquered, in every language they spoke. We left warnings for a reason. We did not want to remember what we are. You have made us remember. The galaxy held its breath and waited for the apocalypse. It did not come. Days passed, then weeks. The humans made no aggressive moves. They did not attack the conquered's remaining fleets. They did not invade their worlds. They simply waited. On the hegemony, Prism of Truth stood before their council and tried to explain. The humans have not attacked because they do not want to attack. They have the power to destroy us, but they choose not to use it. This is significant. It is a trick, said the High Resonance, leader of the hegemony. They wait for us to lower our guard. With respect, High Resonance, what guard? They erased 300 warships in 3 seconds. If they wanted us destroyed, we would already be gone. The Council had no answer for this. In the Eternal Sovereignty, Lord Al had reached the same conclusion. He had seen the recordings of the fleet's destruction. He had studied the energy signatures of the human weapons. What he saw terrified him in ways he could not express. The humans were not just more advanced than the conquered. They were more advanced than anything he had ever imagined possible. Their technology was so far beyond the conquered's that comparison was meaningless. It was like comparing a candle to a star. And they had hidden this power for millions of years. They had chosen to be weak. They had chosen to forget. What kind of species chose to give up such power? Lord Al began to understand something that the others had missed. The humans were not dangerous because of their weapons. They were dangerous because of their choices. A species that could choose to forget how to destroy worlds was capable of things that Al could not begin to predict. He sent a private message to Ambassador. It said simply, "I want to understand." Her response came within minutes. "Then come to Earth. Come alone. I will explain everything." Against the advice of everyone around him, Al went. Ambassador met him in a garden filled with plants from 100 different worlds. She looked older than when they had first met, as if the weight of what had happened had aged her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it took courage." "I came because I need answers," Al said. "Your people have shown power beyond anything we imagined. Why do you not use it? Why did you hide it?" Sat on a stone bench and gestured for him to join her. "Because we used it before. For millions of years we were what you tried to be. We were conquerors. We found species that threatened us and we destroyed them. We found empires that opposed us and we crushed them. We won every war we ever fought." She paused, her eyes distant. "Do you know what it is like to win every war? At first it feels like strength. Then it feels like duty. Then after millions of years it feels like nothing at all. We became machines. We fought because we had always fought. We conquered because we had always conquered. We had forgotten how to do anything else." "What changed?" Al asked. "We met a species called They were peaceful. They had no weapons, no armies, no desire for conquest. When we arrived at their world, they welcomed us. They offered us friendship, art, music, ideas. They saw the universe as something to experience and share, not something to control." His voice grew heavy. "We destroyed them anyway, because that was what we did, because we did not know how to do anything else. And after it was over, we looked at what we had done, and we finally understood what we had become." She met Al's eyes. "We chose to forget because we could not bear to remember. We chose to become weak because strength had made us monsters. We chose to start over because it was the only way to find out if we could ever be something better." Al sat in silence for a long moment. "And are you better?" "I do not know," said honestly. "We have built societies based on cooperation instead of conquest. We have learned to see difference as opportunity instead of threat. We have made mistakes, but we have also made progress. Whether we are better is not for us to judge. That is for others to decide." "The fleet," Al said, "you destroyed them." "We erased them from existence. It was the most merciful option available to us. No pain, no awareness, simply an ending." "That sounds like the monsters you claim to have left behind." Nodded slowly. "You are right. That is the terrible truth of what we are. We try to forget, but some things cannot be forgotten. When we are threatened, we remember. The old instincts return. The old power wakes up, and we do what we have always done." She stood and walked to the edge of the garden, looking out at a sky that held threats the conquered could not imagine. "That is why we need your help," she said. "We cannot change what we are alone. We need others to hold us accountable. We need others to remind us of what we are trying to become. We need friends, not subjects, partners, not slaves." "You are asking the conquered to ally with you," Al said slowly. "I am asking you to help us become something better than we were, and in return, we will help you do the same." Al thought about the sovereignty he served. He thought about the endless wars, the conquered peoples, the fear that held the empire together. He thought about what it might mean to try something different. "What would this alliance look like?" he asked. Smiled, and for the first time she looked young again. "Let us find out together." The galaxy had expected the humans to bring war. Instead, they brought something far more unsettling. They brought questions. Human diplomats appeared on every world in the conquered, not with armies behind them, but alone. They did not threaten. They did not demand. They simply talked to people and asked them questions. On the hegemony worlds, they asked the slave castes why they accepted their chains. "Has it always been this way?" they asked. "Do you believe it must always be this way? What would you choose if you could choose?" On the sovereignty worlds, they asked the soldiers what they were really fighting for. "You defend your empire," they said, "but who does the empire serve? Does it serve you? Does it serve your families? Or do you serve it?" On the Dominion worlds, they asked the citizens whether fear was the same as loyalty. "You obey because you are afraid of punishment," they said. "But what would you do if you were not afraid? Who would you be?" At first, the ruling councils tried to stop them. They arrested the human diplomats and expelled them from their territories. But the questions remained. The people had heard them and they could not them. In the crystalline tunnels of the hegemony, a slave caste worker named Shardovlight looked at the chains she had worn her entire life and asked herself a question she had never asked before. Why? In the fortress cities of the sovereignty, a soldier named Al stood guard over citizens who feared him and asked himself what exactly he was protecting. In the towering spires of the Dominion, a young bureaucrat named Hai looked at the reports of cruelty and oppression that crossed her desk every day and asked herself if this was really what she wanted to serve. The questions spread like fire through dry grass, and where questions burned, old certainties turned to ash. Supreme Commander L watched his empire crumble and could not understand why. There had been no invasion, no battles, no enemy fleets in the sky. The humans had not fired a single weapon since the destruction of the fleet, and yet somehow everything was falling apart. Workers were refusing to work. Soldiers were refusing to fight. Citizens who had been quiet for 1,000 years were suddenly gathering in public squares, demanding changes that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "How are they doing this?" El demanded of his advisors. "What weapon is this?" None of his advisors had an answer. They had been trained to fight wars with ships and soldiers. They had no defense against an enemy who fought with ideas. El ordered his fleet to attack Earth again. The ships launched, traveled halfway to the target and stopped. The crews refused to continue. "We do not want to die for nothing," the lead captain told him over the communication link. "The humans are not our enemies. They have offered us peace. Why should we reject it?" El felt his world collapsing around him. Everything he had built, everything he had believed in, was being swept away by questions he could not answer. He retreated to his private chambers and locked the door. For the first time in his long life, he was alone with his thoughts, and his thoughts terrified him. Ambassador received word that El had requested a meeting. She traveled to the Dominion alone, as she had done so many times before. The palace was empty when she arrived. The guards had abandoned their posts. The servants had gone home. Only El remained, sitting on his floating throne in the vast council chamber. He looked older than she remembered, smaller. The fierce warrior who had ordered the attack on Earth was gone. In his place sat a tired old man who had lost everything he believed in. "You have destroyed me," he said as she entered. "You have destroyed my empire, and you did not fire a single shot." "You destroyed yourself," said gently. "We only showed people that they had a choice. What they did with that choice was up to them. They chose to abandon everything we built, everything we stood for. No, they chose to build something better. What you built was held together by fear. When the fear went away, so did the empire." El laughed bitterly. "And what will replace it? Chaos, anarchy." "Freedom," said. "Cooperation, partnership. Things that are harder to build than empires but more lasting." She walked closer to his throne and looked up at him with something like compassion. "You asked me once why we did not simply destroy you. Do you understand the answer now?" El was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "You have destroyed empires before," he said, "with weapons, with force. But those empires always came back. Different names, different faces, but the same systems of control and fear." "Yes. So you found a different way. You did not destroy the empires. You made them destroy themselves. You showed people that they did not need to be afraid, and without fear, the empires had nothing. Yes. El descended from his throne and stood before her. He had ruled billions of lives. He had commanded fleets that could destroy worlds. Now he was just an old man in an empty room. "What happens to me now?" he asked. "That is up to you," said. "You can hold on to what you were. You can spend the rest of your life fighting against the tide, trying to rebuild what is gone. Or you can become something new. You can help build the world that comes after." "Why would anyone want my help? I am a monster." "You were a monster," corrected. "But you do not have to stay one. That is the gift of choice. That is what we are offering everyone, including you." She extended her hand. "We were monsters too once. We found a way to become something else. It is not easy. It takes time, but it is possible." Al looked at her hand for a long moment. Then slowly he took it. The galaxy changed. It did not happen all at once. It did not happen easily. There were those who fought against the change, who clung to the old ways, who could not imagine a universe without empires and conquest. But they were fewer than anyone had expected, and with each passing year there were fewer still. On 1,000 worlds, people who had been slaves became citizens. Soldiers who had only known war learned new trades. Rulers who had governed through fear discovered that cooperation was more effective and more satisfying. The conquered did not fall. Instead, it transformed. The three founding empires dissolved peacefully, replaced by a loose federation of free worlds. Trade flourished. Science advanced. Art and culture blossomed in ways that had been impossible under the old systems. And at the heart of it all, humanity stood watch. They did not rule. They did not conquer. They simply helped. When conflicts arose, they mediated. When crises struck, they assisted. When anyone, anywhere, needed guidance or support, humanity was there. Lord Al, who had become one of the new Federation's most respected leaders, once asked Ambassador why humanity chose this role. Why, with all their power, they had become servants instead of masters. Smiled at the question. She was very old now, her hair completely white, her body frail, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Because we have been masters," she said. "We have ruled and conquered and controlled. We know where that path leads. It leads to emptiness. It leads to becoming something that wins every battle but loses itself." She looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that had changed so much in her lifetime. "This is better," she said. "Helping instead of controlling, building instead of destroying. It is harder and the rewards are less obvious. But at the end of the day, we can look at what we have done and feel proud instead of ashamed." "And the power?" Al asked. "The weapons that can erase fleets from existence, the technology that is millions of years ahead of anything else." "Still there," said. "Still waiting. We hope we will never need to use it again, but we are not naive. We know that there may come a day when something threatens this new world we have built. When that day comes, we will remember again." "That does not frighten you?" "It terrifies me," said honestly. "Every day I am afraid that we will become what we were, that the old instincts will take over, that we will lose ourselves again." She turned to face him. "That is why we need you, all of you, to remind us of what we are trying to be, to help us stay on the path we have chosen. We cannot do this alone. No one can." Al understood then what humanity had really been seeking all along. Not conquest, not control, not even peace exactly. Connection. They had been alone for millions of years, the only ones of their kind, the only ones who understood what they had been and what they had done. They had hidden from the galaxy because they were afraid of themselves. They had chosen to forget because the memories were too painful. But now, finally, they had found what they had always wanted. Neighbors, friends, equals. And in finding them, they had finally come home. The last scene of this story takes place many years later, in the garden where had first explained humanity's history to Al. Is gone now, as are all the humans who lived through the transformation. But the garden remains, tended by people of a dozen different species who have come to call it holy ground. A young human child plays among the flowers, chasing butterflies that came from a world 1,000 light years away. A crystalline being from the old hegemony watches her with something like wonder, remembering a time when such casual mixing of species would have been unthinkable. A elder sits on the same stone bench where once sat. He is writing a history of the transformation, trying to capture in words what happened and why. He has been working on it for decades, and he knows he will never finish. Some things are too big for words. But he keeps writing anyway because the story matters, because future generations need to know what happened here. They need to know that empires can end without bloodshed, that monsters can choose to become something else, that the most powerful force in the universe is not weapons or technology, but the simple act of asking someone, "What do you really want?" The sun sets over the garden, painting the sky in colors that exist on no other world. The child stops chasing butterflies and looks up at the stars appearing overhead. "Tell me about the old times," she says to the elder. "Tell me about the empires." He closes his book and smiles. "That is a long story," he says, "and parts of it are sad. I want to hear it anyway." So he begins to tell her about a galaxy that once trembled before the great powers, about species that lived in fear and servitude, about the warnings carved into ruins that spoke of beings called Terrans. And as he talks, the stars wheel overhead, indifferent and eternal, watching a universe that has finally learned to change. This is how the story ends. Not with a battle, not with a victory. With a child asking questions, and an old man answering them, in a garden that was planted by beings who chose to become better than they were. With the knowledge that the story never really ends. It just keeps going, carried forward by those who come after, shaped by the choices they make. With the hope that those choices will be good ones. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, humanity keeps watch, not as masters, not as conquerors, just as neighbors, friends, equals. Finally home. Finally at peace. Finally, after millions of years, exactly what they always wanted to be.